Now this is 23rd of September 2020. This is the front page of the Times, which is peddling the myths about Boris Johnson and raising him to the mythological level of being a statesman who is concerned about and is competent to deliberate on the future of humanity. Boris Johnson is being raised to that level, and there is nothing in the Times headline that contains even a shred of evidence that he deserves to be elevated to that post. And this is a repetition of what the Fleet Street papers have been saying for the last 3 days. And it is the total exact copy of what has been scripted by Johnson and his cabal on his controllers. So those are the two. And let's see the Financial Times. It's the same thing. Financial Times saying that Johnson is the one who is warning about perilous time as curfew imposed for 6 months. Or carbs and curfew, what's the difference? And then the Murdoch's son. Murdoch has been asked or has been kind of targeted by the American actress Bette Midler, who has tweeted in the last 24 hours about the last 30 years that Murdoch was given a shelter by the Americans. I mean, Bette Midler is playing the American patriot there. And she's saying that Murdoch has done nothing but damage America. And Murdoch's son is repeating a completely ridiculous slogan, giving Boris Johnson an image that he doesn't deserve and his records don't deserve. So those are the 5 points of the kind of actions, so-called. And then the Daily Star is kind of running this Joker image of Boris Johnson. We shall come to the details of the diagnosis, and we shall be resuming the reference to the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel, how it unleashed an attack on residents and tenants, occupiers, in a property that was dangerously in disrepair, and it nearly killed persons sitting underneath the ceiling when the ceiling fell in New Road, London, E1, 1HE, on 23rd of September 1987. This is 23rd of September 2020. So 20 years plus 13 years, so 33 years ago. 33 years ago, the Royal London Hospital started a campaign to evict, mass eviction program started by the Royal London Hospital in September 1987 in Stepney. Mass eviction. And at the forefront of the eviction, as the target of the eviction, was the campaign, our campaign. And this one, and we're continuing this analysis of the Royal London Hospital because that was the single most lethal attack on everything about society, everything about humanity, everything about the future of humanity, and everything about public service, reference to the preparation for dealing with the pandemic and any other emergency, and also the idea of the National Health Service. The Royal London Hospital was supposed to be the personification, embodiment of public service health. And yet it was attacking people and making people ill. Attacking by using the instrument of eviction. That was 33 years ago. And the instrument of eviction is applied in September 1987 by the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel, London E1, in Stepney, within the London Borough of Tower Hamlets. That attack is still continuing. And with every passing moment, the losses and the damages incurred by the targets of the attack are mounting. So they're mounting beyond the sum, combined sum, allegedly, reportedly, possessed by the 4 billionaires, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, and Bill Gates. We're leaving out Apple because there is no individual associated with Apple that has been given that kind of profile. But whatever the amount, the worth, estimated worth or actual worth or substantiated kind of market value of Apple, and if you add another 5 billionaires, whoever they are, all of their combined, calculated, added up wealth would not match the amount of losses and damages that are still being caused and that began to be caused by the Royal London Hospital attacking the residents who were nearly fatally attacked by the falling ceiling in Stepney, in a building in September, 23rd of September, 1987. So when the Royal London Hospital was told to repair the buildings, instead of repairing the building, instead of fessing up, instead of admitting the negligence and failures of the many years past, they retaliated by launching an auction attack, which meant that effectively all the residents and occupants in their buildings in Stepney were under eviction program. And this was 1987. There was no kind of no-fault eviction at that time. No-fault eviction was brought into being much later by whatever the government centrally was responsible or had the majority in the House of Commons. So the no-fault evictions are now being kind of operated by the evictors. Now that the ban on eviction proceedings has been lifted by Robert Jenrick in September 2020. But 33 years ago, there was no such thing as no-fault eviction. So the legal protection that used to be available to the tenants 33 years ago, that protection has been removed in the 33 years. But even though there was this protection, the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel, London E1, took a detailed, elaborate, illegal, criminal, oppressive series of action to break the law and to get away with that, which was to put the entire street of the properties on a auction, mass auction, thus causing any number of people, hundreds of people were there, whatever the actual number, there were dozens, even hundreds of people affected. So those people, most of them were not engaged in any unique research, campaign, investigative, world kind of serving, intellectual work. It was just our movement, and it was affected by the falling ceiling. So when we talk about falling ceiling and falling kind of dangerously disrepaired kind of properties in tower hamlets, we don't do that based on some kind of slogan. We do that based on absolutely first-hand empirical record and evidence. And that is the empirical record and evidence in this context about the eviction program that was being used by the Royal London Hospital 33 years ago. And as I have said before in a previous kind of record and broadcast, the only person that can be kind of referred to at this time, 33 years later, assuming that person is still alive, was a man called Brendan O'Sullivan. Now, Brendan O'Sullivan was a kind of experienced person in housing associations and in related construction and building work relating to housing associations and housing association properties. And he was familiar with the kind of basic relationship that should prevail between tenants and the housing associations. And Brendan O'Sullivan was working in the East End of London, but not in Tower Hamlets until he was, I think, invited by the then Spitalfields Housing Cooperative, 1987, September 1987, he invited me to make use of some printing facilities or copying facilities to distribute campaign literature, campaign publication. It was Brendan O'Sullivan that invited me because I had been criticizing his association with the Spitalfield Housing Cooperative, whose management had been corrupt and accused of corruption and all the other things that go with these accusations. Now, I shall not discuss the details of the history of the Spitalfields Housing Cooperative in detail in this kind of broadcast, but it will be done. It will be done as part of the contextual need to update the commentary and the evidential commentary on the role of these organizations that were set up as a result of the campaigns, like my campaign and the campaign that I have been leading, all kinds of campaigns, and what they delivered and what they should have delivered. These are the two questions that should be answered, and these questions will be put and answered on the basis of evidence, not based on any prejudice or any particular personally aimed agenda against anyone. So the Royal London Hospital caused hundreds of billions worth of damages. Hundreds of billions of worth of damages. It is like equivalent to the combined wealth or possessed wealth by several leading economies. So therefore, the role of the Royal London Hospital should have been investigated by the newspapers. But no, they don't even know. This is the world exclusive diagnostic exclusive report which is containing this information. So this is the only place where anyone watching this, whenever they're watching this, whether now live as it is being recorded on Wednesday, the 23rd of September 2020, or they have access to it later, at a later date. And that should be there. Now, represented in that absence of investigation, ordinary reporting on that kind of real goings on and issues and actions and wrongdoings is the absence of the evidence and evidential reporting on the pandemic. So what we have seen so far and what we are about to see on the front page of the Daily Express of today is suggested hints and brazen hints at Boris Johnson being another Winston Churchill in the image that they have been creating of Winston Churchill as the statesman and so forth. And Johnson has craved for decades this idea that he is another Churchill. Now, anyone who has been reading the reports about his behavior would know that Churchill may have had all kinds of faults which he had, including the causing of the famine and the genocidal murder of millions of Bengalis in 1943. But Churchill was not so shallow in public or in the image that was reported of him at the time. In fact, even the image of Churchill that has been published since his death does not come anywhere near the image of shallowness and criminal irresponsibility and criminal entitlement that is exposed in the behavior and in the denial personality of Boris Johnson. So here is the Beaverbrook liars hinting that he is the new Churchill. Our destiny. God, I mean, this is the kind of phrase that Churchill is associated with. And then, of course, this is the Daily Mail today. And the Daily Mail is forced to give a list of the, well, in their OS, 6 kind of things that Boris Johnson is going to unleash. According to the Sun, which is the next circulation rival, there are 5 big issues. And there is the kind of super promotion for Kate Middleton by the Daily Mail. Compare the super hatred against Meghan Markle. And they have nothing but absolutely world-class lies to promote Kate Middleton. And they're saying that she has even solved the problem of COVID-19 gloom. Miracle. And this is the extent of the lying by the Daily Mail and the Fleet Street papers. And their coverage of Johnson on 2 pages where there is a sketch by Henry Deeds whose piece is headlined, "Nothing says UK open for business like commandos on the streets." So what they're saying is that Johnson is bringing in the army and putting the army on the streets. Now, quite apart from the fact that there is no way that the army can manage the whole population, this is logistically totally impractical from this army's standpoint. It is not going to allow the army, military, on the streets. But that is me saying it. Let's look at this one. This is the warning that they are running in the Boris Johnson kind of highly orchestrated kind of delivery of this television kind of spiel so-called to the nation yesterday. And all of these, plus his so-called delivery to the nation, all these papers, all the broadcasting counterparts, that is the BBC, Sky News, ITV, nowhere is there any information about where it begins and where it goes. The virus, that is, they have not been telling the public where it is contracted and how many stages does it travel before it reaches the end, whatever the end is, whether recovery or not. So it's all shadow boxing and all kind of explanation without any substance. It is all headlines and image. So going back to the 100 billion or trillions worth of damage that the Royal London Hospital caused and has been causing for the last 33 years. That warrants everyday update because it is that important, that significant about the future well-being of the humanity, which is the Times is saying that the struggle, humanity will win the struggle in the end. That is the reference and recognition to the concept of humanity in the Fleet Street papers. They don't normally recognize humanity at all. They have patriotism and other stuff. They don't talk about humanity because humanity is not far from human rights. So the human rights are being violated by the Johnson-fronted cabal every day. And their media, their kind of collusive media. So what is happening here in the actual kind of denial, the denial of the truth by the media is consistent with the denial of obligations by the Royal London Hospital management, who decided that instead of accepting responsibility for the negligence and the lethal negligence of the properties that the Royal London Hospital had control over, they should mount an attack on the people. Now that was 1987. That was the time when there was no fault eviction available as it is now, right? As it has become available since. And so the question is, not only are the media, so-called mainstream media, neglecting and totally in denial of these serious activities that are destroying people's rights and destroying the quality of people's lives and destroying the quality of society and causing uncountable, immeasurable amounts of losses to people and sufferings, and their losses to health and the sufferings. So think about this. This is the equivalent in terms of principle, equivalent to the UK and the Western countries for decades, until Angela Merkel became leader of Germany. The German political decision-making was very similar to the decision-making or decisions made in France and in Britain, and to a large extent in America, Canada, whatever. And when I say the decisions, I mean the decisions affecting the big issues, affecting the biggest populations in the countries, and the biggest populations in the rest of the world affected by the behavior and the decisions of those countries. So when I made the broadcast on Channel 4 News slot, the slot was called slot. So I say slot twice. The Channel 4 News at 7 o'clock in the UK time used to be followed by this thing called slot, which was reserved for mostly MPs and ministers or whatever, and it wasn't a kind of vox pop. It was reserved to a very limited category or group of people. So I argued my way into presenting about 3, I think. Because when I say I think 3, that is because I've checked the archives, and the archives checking communications have been either ignored or been given an automated response saying that because of COVID and the pandemic, they are not engaging with communications in the way that they would be. So I cannot take the count further than an estimated 3. I don't think it was more than 4. And I say not more than 4 because the amount of battle that I had to engage in order to convince the Channel 4 personnel before they would concede and let me do a broadcast was incompatible with the amount of time that I had given other responsibility and commitments. So that means that I had more issues than I had the opportunities to air them through Channel 4 slot. But the one that I did manage to do was in January 1992. And it was at the time of the sitting of the General Assembly of the United Nations. The United Nations sitting now, the 75th anniversary is being kind of marked now, the UN General Assembly, and all kinds of despots and liars and crooks in positions as heads of government have been spilling their way online. And they are not, none of them so far has come anywhere near saying a fraction of what I said in January 1992 about solving the problem of migration, hunger, starvation in the way that I said it was affecting, and in the way that I said it would affect the world, and it has been affecting the world. And despite that evidence, none of the heads of governments has come anywhere near, so far, the ones that have so far given the speeches, has come anywhere near representing the truth of the kind of actions that I said needed to be taken. And those actions are still fresh and valid. Nothing has happened in terms of the intellectual analysis by anybody that has superseded what I said in 1992, let alone replaced what I said in 1992 in terms of practice and in terms of the evidence in the increasing numbers of people being made destitute and being caused severe hardship and famine and genocide. So I said one of the things that I had included in my broadcast, which I wrote and presented in a short time, very short time, without any resources, without any access to having the access to the likes of the libraries like the British Library or any specialist library or ones that are situated at university campuses. So I did the research myself and I did the thinking, all of it, and I wrote the piece like literally while I was walking to Channel 4. And the actual evidence of what I said is still online on the archives. But I don't have the actual transcript this minute to reread. I had the videos in the collection of resources and possessions that were attacked by the Royal London Hospital in 1987, but the actual attack went on until 10th of November 1993, when I was left with no option but to move all this stuff from the place in New Road. And that is what I mean by the damages caused by the Royal London Hospital attacks. Damages literally to the archives and the many copies of the many texts that I wrote, either by hand or by typing on manual typewriters, or when it became available, the elementary computers that Alan Sugar was selling at the time. And then, of course, from 1991, the 1991 versions of Apple computer. All of those were acquired by making severe kind of sacrifices in terms of personnel needs, and giving up personal needs, I paid for the equipments, and I continued even in the face of the attacks from the Royal London Hospital and the other attended attacks that continued. I continued the work every day in doing the campaigns, doing the advocacy, doing the organizing. So therefore the quality and the essence of what I was producing should be seen as many times more important and valuable than it would be the case if I had been doing it like a plastic operation. Every single word that I wrote was original, and every single piece that I wrote was originally dedicated, result of original dedication and sacrificing any number of amenities and personnel needs. Think about that. So, when the Royal London Hospital was told by Brendan O'Sullivan to stop the attacks and allow the time necessary to defend the properties, those intellectual properties, the Royal London Hospital completely refused. So this is one of the claims against the Royal London Hospital, dating back 33 years, but also covering hundreds of billions pounds of worth of damages that they caused. And that includes the losses of homes by millions of people across the world that were going to be prevented. The losses were going to be prevented by my taking the planned next actions which would have been taken. Just as I took actions after the 1991 cyclone that hit the coastal areas, southern Bangladesh. And one of the symbolic things that I was able to achieve was to persuade the government fronted by John Major in the UK to raise the commitment to donate £50,000 to help the Bangladesh government deal with the emergency by raising it to 50 million. Now think about that. So that is the kind of exponential difference that could have been made, and I did make the difference by doing the creation of the impact, creation of the campaigns that had the appropriate and correct impact. As I said before, on the night of the 4th of May 1991, I went to number 10 Downing Street. I had no crowd of people to take there. Whoever was within my talking kind of like contacts, I gathered some and I hired a minicab and I took these people to the Downing Street. And I had told the BBC and whoever that I was going to do that about Bangladesh. And the BBC must have sent a camera crew. And they recorded it as I was handing the letter. Now that letter, handwritten letter, I had written in Downing Street while waiting for the gate to be opened and the others to arrive. So it wasn't even typewritten. So I wrote that letter by hand and delivered the letter at number 10 Downing Street. And I was accompanied by another 3 or 4, maybe 5 persons, whoever they were. They were not there willingly. They were there because I had persuaded them to go there. Because if I had gone there on my own, that is not what happens. It needs a group. That's as simple as that. But I had no group of people that I could take there. I had only whoever was available within literally the minutes before I had to go there to deliver the letter. So the BBC treated this as a genuine item of emergency, which it absolutely was. And so they had treated this as emergency and humanitarian correctly. And they put that as number 1 item in the main evening news bulletin. Was it 10 o'clock? Was it 9 o'clock? I have to check that one because previously I've said 10 o'clock. Now remember that was 1991, May 1991. So it is completely possible that it was 9 o'clock or it was 10 o'clock. Whatever hour it was the main bulletin of the evening on the BBC television, BBC One. And this news was presented by this Mitchell. Mitchell was a news presenter who Mitchell is now and has been in the recent many years a media spokesperson and consultant to the parents of Madeleine McCann. So it's that Mitchell who no longer works for the BBC, but that was the newsreader. So I'm giving the exact kind of reference there. And the fact that this was featured as the first and the leading item must have had an impact on the decision made by John Major, because they must have concluded that that is absolutely the right thing to do. So they raised their money and they paid 50 million pounds to Bangladesh. They must have paid more money in the years to come. But I knew about the 50 million, not from any letters that they wrote to me. But when I went to the department, foreign department, with a number of other people, again, picking them and forcing them to come with me, I was told by an official in that meeting that the Prime Minister of Bangladesh at the time had sent congratulatory letter to the British government after receiving the money, 50 million pounds. The Prime Minister of Bangladesh, whoever it was, never sent any communication to me. But it was my work that had made that possible. From 50,000 to 50 million. It wasn't because of anything done by the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, whoever there was, as I said. So that is the kind of indication of the kind of timely and strategic actions to draw urgent attention to the very urgent issues that I have been doing for a very long time. And I have been significantly hampered from doing more of by the robbery and theft of the resources. The theft and robbery that the Royal London Hospital launched against my work and against the work for the humanity, for the good of humanity everywhere, by attacking the complainants, who included me, of course, who had complained about the Royal London Hospital maintaining buildings in disrepair, lethally dangerous disrepair. So when Brendan O'Sullivan, who was working as an employee in the Spitalfields Housing Cooperative, now based at the corner of Quaker Street and Brick Lane and known as Spitalfields Housing Association, Brendan O'Sullivan asked the Royal London Hospital to cooperate with me and another housing association so that we could buy the property and avoid losing the property and losing the base and losing the site for the archives and action archives and the materials. So we shall be updating more on this in due course, and today has been the first day marking the anniversary of that attack by the Royal London Hospital. So this is 22 minutes after 1600 hours GMT on Wednesday, the 23rd of September 2020.